Pictured here is John Africa. He is the founder of the MOVE movement. On the evening of May 13th, 1985, long-standing tensions between MOVE, a Black liberation group, and the Philadelphia Police Department erupted horrifically. The night the city of Philadelphia dropped a satchel bomb, a demolition device typically used in combat. So they dropped a bomb on the house that they was living in. It was a row house. This house was occupied by men, women, and children. It went up in unextinguished flames. What the story is that after they dropped the bomb, instead of going in and saving people, they let the fire burn. So it ended up, hopping from home to home, and the whole block down there was burned. So 250 citizens, they were left homeless. So MOVE was a political and religious organization whose principles were anti-government, anti-technology, anti-corporation. Its creator, pictured here, John Africa, born Vincent Leapart, was a West Philadelphia native and Korean War veteran whose ideology combined Black revolutionary ideas with environmental and animal rights, as well as a back to nature movement. They had a different type of ideology. And let me just add this. They had a different type of stance, different ideology, anti-government, anti-technology. They wanted to go back to nature or whatnot. Y'all heard the story before. You heard the story of America dropping a bomb on Black people. Well, this is the actual story.
It happened on May 13th, 1985. That is when the city dropped a bomb on a home on Osage Avenue in West Philadelphia, where members of the MOVE organization lived. The bombing and fire that followed killed 6 adults and 5 children. It destroyed 61 homes.
At 5:30 this morning, warrants were to be served on the MOVE members. 20 minutes later, gunfire erupted.
The order to deploy 500 officers to evict MOVE members. 13 people were in the communal home on that fateful day, including 6 children. The standoff lasted for hours before the police finally dropped a bomb on the house. The building went up in flames and the fire quickly spread to the whole block, destroying more than 60 houses and leaving hundreds homeless.
The back of the house, it was cops all around there, and they shot at us, to try to keep us from coming out. And that's why 11 people died in that house, was murdered in that house, and only 2 of us survived.
4 decades for this kind of closure. The Dotson family walks up to the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's office. Inside, the remains, bones and fragments of Katricia and Zanetta, just 12 and 14, both killed in the 1985 MOVE bombing.
Finally getting them a resting place permanently. I can do this for them.
The remains were tucked away, some say hidden, only discovered by a staffer in the past few years. It's unclear why they were never given to the family before.
And these particular remains that are being released today were just put in a box and forgotten.
It took them 37 years to do the right thing.
The family considering legal action, while the city has faced fallout here before. Health Commissioner Thomas Farley forced to resign after the city says he ordered the disposal of those remains, an order that was refused.
The city, instead of worrying about the humanity of the victims, they were worried about themselves.
The bombing has left scars deep in Philadelphia and for the Dotsons. The girls will be buried in North Carolina, far from the row home where they burned to death. Their brother says he's gotten no apology from the city until today. Did they apologize?
The medical examiner herself, yes, she did. They're acknowledging their wrongdoing. Even though she had nothing to do with it, she's apologizing on behalf of the people that came before her. So I take that, and that gives me some kind of closure. They're owning up for holding them for so long on the shelf in the box.
The city commissioned a review of what happened here, but could not determine why the remains were missing for so long. Meantime, other institutions like Penn and Princeton have also been accused of mishandling MOVE bombing remains as well.
Penn has remains also. And for a long time, they have been using these remains to study and to pry and prick and use for students. And it's so unethical. And you have to think about the trauma that happened at that time. And for them to use those bodies and not return them rightfully to the families, is diabolical.
So it is absolutely unacceptable that we are back in the same situation 3 years later. The Penn Museum apologized for mishandling the MOVE remains in 2021, but talk is cheap. We need the Penn Museum to prove that they mean what they say through action and not just words. Instead, the Penn Museum continues to demonstrate a profound disrespect for Black life and Black death. When activists alerted museum leadership that the institution still possessed the remains of Delisha Africa over a year ago, the museum ignored them. There is absolutely no possible justification for the museum's barbaric treatment of a Black child's body, or their dismissive behavior towards those fighting to give Delisha some semblance of peace in death. We understand that the Penn Museum is a research institution and is used to slow, methodical studies that take years, but they need to realize that this is not an academic project. There is real trauma and pain here that needs to be taken seriously and addressed swiftly. The Africa family deserves closure, and they should have received that decades ago. The fact that we are still here holding our breath, waiting for even more remains to be discovered 3 years after this initially came to light is a slap in the face to the Africa family and our community at large. It is past time for the Penn Museum to work in a real and authentic way with the Africa family and community to quickly review the museum's entire inventory and return Delisha's remains and any other MOVE bombing remains in the museum's possession to their family or community so that they can finally be put to rest. And most importantly, the Penn Museum needs to learn a very important lesson. In life or in death, it is never okay to use Black bodies as trophies or to enrich an institution.
This is a part of, like Bulls fan was saying, Henrietta Lack, the Tuskegee experiment, certain things like that. This is a part of that. This is a tradition, or should I say a pattern in Europeans that they have always, mutilated and dug up our people and did studies and research without consent from the family. I'm gonna play a little bit with this. This is the nephew of John Africa, and this needs to be heard. So I want brothers and sisters to hear this because this is heavy also.
On May 13th, 1985, when the city of Philadelphia dropped a bomb on our house, killed 11 people, 5 of them were children, and then took our house from us through eminent domain, which we're still trying to fight to get back. They stole the remains of many people. It wasn't just Tree, Katricia Dotson, Tree Africa. It wasn't just Delisha. We have documentation that says, the wording is gruesome. But I'll give you some of it so that you understand the level of harm and trauma and pain and violence that the MOVE organization have experienced at the hands of law enforcement here in Philadelphia. Some of the bodies were said to not be identifiable because, according to these reports from some of the medical examiners, they say too many heads and torsos were missing.
It's crazy.
When we uncovered some of the evidence, we learned that a Penn student by the name of Jane Weiss did a dissertation. She wrote a dissertation about Delisha Africa. And in that dissertation is an X-ray of 12-year-old Delisha Africa's head. In 2021, when city and Penn said they were going to do all they could to get our family members' remains back to us. They did turn over some things. But I can tell you that as the great nephew of John Africa, who was one of the bodies that was buried without a head, when they returned the remains of John Africa, they did not return his head.
So after all of this, when America, and let me just say, it was the mayor at the time that basically said to drop a bomb on this row house. And as y'all saw, what I covered is that, not only did it burn that house, 250 residents of that neighborhood lost their homes also. And when these people were trying to get out of the burning home, police were shooting at them, so they couldn't get out. And so that's why it was only 2 survivors. And now you have first in 2021, it came out that, they still had some remains that were hidden away somewhere. Now, 3 years later, they have found more remains. And an activist basically alerted people that Penn Museum had still had remains. And now you hear the testimony from this brother who is a nephew of a great nephew of John Africa. He's saying that he was the one that actually received, the bags and things that the bodies were in, and he received all the reports. And John Africa did not have his head, and many of the people they couldn't be identified because they didn't have their heads. So in essence, what happened is that, whoever, whether it was, the coroner, the people that had access to the bodies, decided that they would take heads, the children's heads, the adults' heads, and do studies and, do all of this type of inhumane thing and mutilation in the name of education and, science. But like I said earlier, it's unethical, it's diabolical, it's evil. It's like, it's an unimaginable that they would do. Well, not that much unimaginable, but we know from history that this is something that has, been happening since they was digging up mummies in Egypt. So this is something that they do, is desecrate bodies, dehumanize Black people as if we don't deserve any respect, even in death. Okay, even in death. And it makes me think about there was a king from Ghana. They just a few years ago they returned his head. So during the colonial period, when they conquered Ghana, they beheaded the king, and they had his head in a jar somewhere in Europe somewhere. And they returned that. And there's a famous picture. I was going to show the picture, but I thought like maybe not, because YouTube policies and all of that. But there's a picture with a white scientist, and he's sitting there, and the wall behind him is literally full of Maori heads. The Maori people, they're like a Polynesian, a Fiji type people, and it's full of their heads, and so this is a thing that it's a tradition within Europeans. This is a thing that is, it's a part of them to do this type of stuff to deceased Black people, because they don't see us as, worthy of that type of respect in life. So why would they see that we're worthy of that respect in death?